Welcome to Monday's Q&A with Felicia Amenta from the JPA and myself, Dr. Debra Dupree. Thank you so much. Pleasure to have everyone here today. You know, we do this about once a month. We took a little break in July, and now we're back as schools are rapidly opening and the whole COVID environment continues to change. I don't think if we look back a year ago that we would ever thought we'd still be in this situation today, right?
Yes, thank you, Debra. I'm happy to be here. It's our third school year that we're starting in the midst of COVID. So I have great respect and admiration for my school districts and everything, and charter schools and community colleges, everything that they have been going through. It's really been challenging.
Yes, I oftentimes will say whenever anybody will sort of challenge this whole interactive process that I'm a big part of. And I said, listen, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I have never seen a period of time like the last year and a half or two with rapidly changing guidelines and, you know, oh my gosh, you know, and decisions. I've never seen so much change in my entire career of doing this kind of work.
Right. I still think that because of the dynamics and the changes, that being flexible and empathetic and compassionate are more important than they ever were in this space.
I absolutely agree with you because, you know, people are challenged and pressed on so many fronts, not just with a medical condition, but then an underlying medical condition that's impacted by COVID, not to mention their family members and, you know, and then just closure, non-closure, quarantine, non-quarantine, you know, every day is like a new day. And so I know for you and I, we would regularly check the headlines and be up to date. And so on that note, I would like to go ahead and get started. You know, the reality is that schools have been and are continuing to open up. And, you know, because the school districts operate differently and yet much alike, you know, what are some of the highlights, Felicia, some of the ins and outs, and also some of the unknowns we have yet to tackle?
So we have seen some experience because we do have 2 of our large school district members opened in the middle of July. So that gave us a little idea of what we might see going forward. And those 2 school districts that opened in July are a large elementary and a very large high school district. And both of those districts experienced positive COVID-19 cases primarily within their student population, but we also have some employees that also have tested positive for COVID. But the majority of the cases that we're seeing now are in children. And I think that's been particularly concerning because the rises, it's not well understood what's causing the rise in cases and hospitalization in young children. I think they're not sure yet whether they're more susceptible to the Delta variant or simply young children make up a big part of the unvaccinated population in areas where the virus is still circulating widely. So,
and therefore, that's what leads to a lot of the unknown yet. And I know people were really frustrated throughout this whole COVID process, you know, with the changing information, but quite frankly, we've never quite ever dealt with anything like this. And you know, and just really what are the ramifications and who is most impacted. And so we were able to sort that out to a large degree early on. And I think we saw the effects of vaccination and so forth, you know, on that more at-risk population. But you're right, today we don't know, you know, what's making the younger children more susceptible, or is it simply a matter of not being vaccinated?
Right.
I just don't know. Yeah.
We've been getting a lot of questions because that contact tracing job and where that falls has really been handled differently out at the districts. I would say most of the districts, the contact tracing and the responsibility to follow up on the testing and the quarantining has been in HR predominantly. But some of the districts have moved all of things COVID to the risk management department. And then some districts have, I noticed some of our members have been decentralizing so that each site if they have a school nurse or someone that's reporting or dealing with the public health department, if they have admin or nurses, they're kind of doing the contact tracing and then spreading that out amongst the sites for districts that have a large number of sites. So everybody's handling it a little bit differently. I have been getting a lot of questions for contact tracing training, or because there's been a lot of questions within the district. Do we do the contact tracing from within with our own staff and train them up, or do we hire from without? And we've seen both. We have a very large high school district that's been open for over a month now, and they have been doing it with their own staff. And then we have another district who hired out to a third-party vendor, and they have been doing their contact tracing. So both are, good methods to solve it. You just have to have staff that are trained, because now that we know that as we're opening, we're having positive COVID cases, it's time consuming. The contact tracing is time consuming. There's a lot of phone calling. And then, of course, let alone the reporting into the Athens portal if you have any positive COVID-19 cases, and then also the responsibilities that they have for sending the letter notifying close contacts. So there's a lot of responsibilities there that have to be followed. But we do have a lot of at SDCOE, we do have a lot of free training resources available if you choose to do it with your own internal staff and train them up.
Well, that's excellent to know then, is that that SDCOE has those kinds of resources available. I just was thinking, job descriptions are always at play in the interactive process. And I bet we have lots of people working, performing tasks related to COVID management that aren't anywhere in their job description for now. And, it will remain to be seen if this will actually lead to some longer term changes, functional or essential functions for some types of positions, or maybe even possibly new positions being created. That's another unknown, right?
That's been one of the most difficult questions, I think, is they're saying what's better is, should we add to staff, or should we move job duties around in between? Because if this is temporary, we don't want to create new positions that we won't need long term, right? So looking down the road, it's been difficult, and some districts have just addressed that challenge by just hiring and contracting out. And some have said, well, all right, we'll temporarily repurpose some of our staff and move some job duties around. And some have actually hired some temps or repurposed other positions to do the contact tracing. And with the contact tracing comes the question of testing, right? So I've been receiving, that's the second question. I've been getting a lot of questions about resources about, can our vendors that are our ACMED partners, can they come onto campuses and do some of the testing that some of the districts need on site? A lot of the partners have responded, Kaiser, Sharp, Scripps, that right now, because of the surge in the Delta variant and what's happening at the hospitals with COVID, they don't have the staff available to come onto our sites and test our employees on site. But they do. I have contracted with all of our medical partners to do COVID testing. So any districts can reach out to me and I can assist with that, because we have those resources available for all of our members.
Okay, so if I got that right, all of your contracted medical providers have agreed to and are available to do testing for COVID, or not contact tracing, but testing for COVID.
Testing for COVID, right?
Okay.
One of our work partners just announced to me on Friday that they have the vaccine, that they are administering vaccine. It is not free, though. You have to pay $25 for the administration of the shot. But that's the first of our ACMED providers. Of course, Sharp and Kaiser have the vaccine and have been doing that routinely, but so our partners are trying to engage in this space so that they can provide more services for our school districts.
Yeah, well, that's really great. I mean, certainly they have more the medical background that's so tied to this whole process. So that's great to have those adjunct resources when most school districts wouldn't have that kind of personnel.
Right.
on staff or even contracted. Yeah. It's another thought, here we thought that once the vaccinations would come, we could, we'd probably see a decline in the testing, right? COVID testing. But now we can see with this Delta variant that, unfortunately, even though you are vaccinated, we're so capable of carrying the virus and not even know it. And so testing continues to be a real strong, important element to this whole COVID management era of life.
Right. And you know what happened with the county resources, a lot of the county sites closed because there wasn't as much testing going on when there was a drop in COVID. And now with the surge, they're kind of trying to staff that up again. And the one thing that we're seeing again now is long waits for testing results. I have heard from some of our charter school and district members as much as 4 to 7 days to get test results back again, whereas we were at a very good place where we could get them in a 24 to 48 hour period, and that's right now is not happening typically in the county sites anyway. So we'll see more to follow on whether those ramp up a little bit, especially in light of the new health orders.
Yeah. So help me understand, what are some of the, with this surge again, and particularly among, our younger population who aren't yet eligible for vaccination, what do you see as being some of the implications for operations moving ahead? I know we've touched on a few things already. I'm just thinking about today's announcement about Pfizer, getting fully approved, and then also the availability of the booster, shall we say, or third shot. So comment on some of those things, Felicia, as you see it.
Well, so because of the health orders that have been put in place, all of our member districts are masked for the student population and for the employee population, for our school employees. It was interesting to hear last week that we have been masking indoors. Los Angeles Unified School District, I believe I read that they are masking indoors and outdoors. That's something they're doing because of where they are with their community spread and their surge. So it depends on where you are and where the transmission is. But here in San Diego, almost all of our districts, are masking indoors for students and staff. So to keep everyone safe, right?
Sure.
Because we have, when you think about it, and it's just like when you look at OSHA has new guidelines they put out on August 13th. So very recently now for COVID-19 safety measures in higher risk industries or in workplaces that have mixed vaccination status, which I certainly, and we have that, certainly in our student population with the under 12 that cannot get vaccinated.
Right. Well, in many respects, we've been aware for quite some time that, some conditions just are not amenable to the vaccination for a whole host of reasons. And so that's where, additional precautions and accommodations become essential. And I've certainly seen many IPMs where we've had to, given that, then how else can we approach this? Because the goal is always to keep people working, and yet within, some standard guidelines as well.
I think I've seen more requests for IPMs, both on the industrial side. It's interesting, even though COVID-19 is largely been in our population anyway, non-industrial, because previously most of our employees were working virtually. Now that we're going back into school, I have seen we've been doing a lot of hiring. Because I manage the pre-placement physical program, the services for new hires. That program, we've been doing a lot of hiring throughout the county at all the school districts and charter schools and colleges. And also we've been seeing a large number of requests for IPMs on the work comp claims, but also on the non-industrial side, which I'm sure you've been seeing for a wide variety of reasons.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think we've talked before, Felicia. I know, my connection with you is largely on the workers' comp side, but as my predecessor did too, definitely provide the services for non-industrial, because it's a lot of confusing things out there to understand. But there's actually just as many non-work related IPMs that I do if not actually a little bit more than there are for work related, and so it sort of depends on the complexity and the uniqueness of the situation and, the duration and all those kinds of good things. So lots of factors go into deciding to do or not to do. And obviously, with the federal law being what it is that better to engage and interact than not, because the financial consequences and liabilities are huge if people don't attempt to engage at all. And so then it's, do we do it internally or, hire an outside facilitator like myself to do it? And so that's a matter of choice too, and how comfortable people feel dealing with, all the complexities of the situation.
We had a conversation, I had a conversation with a school district on Friday about this. I said, if you have not gone through the interactive process, even one time, and you're new to a position in HR or risk, I always recommend that they use you as a consultant, either on the work comp side or the non-industrial side, until they get comfortable with all the laws, because a misstep in the IPM does not cause litigation in the work comp world. A misstep in an IPM causes civil litigation, which can be very costly. And there is still confusion about that. They still feel that if it's a comp claim, that the litigation is sort of limited to the work comp claim itself, which really the disability, what caused it doesn't even matter.
No.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't. And, I don't believe that this has changed. Although I have to admit, I haven't had the need to check it for a long time. But the liability is actually up to as much as $300,000 per infraction. And
reinstatement of your position with past pay.
Yes. It gets very, and then not to mention the litigation costs getting there, So it can be hugely costly, far more than any workers' compensation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, prior to COVID, I'd implemented training programs back in 2018, 2019, because I felt that people needed to know, how to do these things. And of course, with COVID, haven't quite finished getting it transferred over into the virtual world, but that is forthcoming. So if people are interested in learning and training, I love teaching, so that's why I like to help people learn. And so, and actually, what you just described, Felicia, is very consistent with what I've done with the U.S. Navy for 20 years. I'm a mentor mediator, so I take them through a series of mediations, or in this case, facilitations, until they get the handle of it, and then you're off on your own. So,
right.
Yeah. So I'm curious. And I can appreciate you may not have any idea of this, but, given again the ongoing changes with, again, masking indoors, masking outdoors, and what LA County is doing, we certainly see what's happening in Florida with, school districts defying the Florida governor's direction of no mask. Is there any potential that San Diego might be facing an outdoor masking requirement as well, or what do you think from your?
I haven't seen anything like that, and I did listen to. We do a coffee with the superintendent on a regular basis at SDCOE with Dr. Paul Gotthold, who's our leader, and he's leading in this time in a very inspirational way. I don't think I've ever been as inspired to. We're still in the business of taking care and educating children, right? That's our core mission. And we've tried to stay laser focused on that and not get too distracted by all the other things that are going on. But certainly the masking indoors is still our mandate. If that changes with the health department, that remains to be seen in the future. Certainly the big items now are the two health orders that came down on July 26th and August 11th. July 26th for all congregate care settings, which we have in our some of our special ed, and also in some of our court schools. We have some congregate care settings where they're in close proximity. And then on August 11th, all school employees are under a health order to get fully vaccinated or begin weekly testing for COVID-19 and wearing appropriate PPE. So that was sort of the most recent change that we have.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for going there. Yeah, I know that, you so gratefully keep me abreast of what's happening at the or the county office, and so I do appreciate that. And I know some other things just came out today that I haven't had a chance to unfortunately look through. I'm curious, with again the changes going on, are you expecting any other kinds of potential implications for the start of the school year or what's already in progress?
So most of our school districts started last week. Some started the week before that, and some are starting today. So we're in the midst of opening now. And that's why there's so many resources and questions being made available to the districts for everything from contact tracing to testing. Because if we are not, as SDCOE has clearly stated, we're not mandating vaccination. If we are collecting, you must provide proof of your vaccination status.
Okay.
And many of the districts are collecting this in a different manner because this is information that has to be, carefully collected and stored. And some districts are using PeopleSoft to collect and keep track of this information. I've heard some districts using Google Docs. Some districts are using different methods in their HR department, but basically we're asking all employees to tell us or confirm whether you have been fully vaccinated. If you do not provide proof, and there are several recommendations of what proof is, if you do not provide proof of your vaccination, then we will assume, it will be assumed that you are not fully vaccinated. This is what SDCOE's putting out. We'll assume that you are not fully vaccinated, and then we will, more to follow. HR is going to set up a weekly testing schedule, I guess, for those employees, and their quarantining may be altered, may be different, and they have to wear appropriate PPE. So more to come on all of that, because we have until October 15th to come into full compliance. But obviously the weekly testing, some districts are contacting myself to contract with some of our OCMED clinics partners that we already have, like Kaiser and Sharp and Concentra, and some of our private partners. And then some districts are using the county, and some are hiring out to private firms that will do this weekly testing so that they can capture all of that, because they need to get the weekly test results. So, and then of course, this needs to be somebody's job responsibility, right? Is to monitor all of this information. So that's a little different, right? We're not mandating vaccination. We're saying if you decide to not get fully vaccinated, these are the requirements.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. And just to clarify, you said October 15th is
correct.
Is the deadline.
That's the deadline in the governor's health order to come into full compliance, right? So that gives us some time. So all the districts are trying to set up that information to gather the vaccination status, how to do that and where they're going to store that, because that varies from district to district. And then what they're going to do about who they're going to use to do the weekly testing for COVID-19.
Okay.
And then, of course, making sure that they have the appropriate PPE for those individuals that choose to remain unvaccinated.
Okay, very good. And I'm curious, because, again, what we've learned about COVID-19 and, and certainly we're still learning about the Delta variant, but it's my impression, but I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking you this. Has there been revisions or backing off of some of the sanitization procedures that were implemented when we first opened last year?
The August 13th updated OSHA guidance, I didn't have a chance. I can pull that up and send that to you, but it has a multi-layered intervention program. So there are many things that the districts working with their safety personnel, and they also can use, if they're members of the JPA, they can use our loss control staff. We have 3 loss control staff that are highly trained in all of the OSHA safety requirements for COVID. And those include, you're right, spacing and partitions and good air ventilation, and looking at your HVAC systems. And it added, those updated guidance added some safety measures.
Okay.
just for that reason.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And I knew I was aware of it changing, but wasn't quite sure how. So August 13th is our latest and
Mhm.
greatest update. Great, great.
Mhm.
So it looks like we will have a lot more to share in terms of, the world of COVID come our next program in September then, which is September
Mhm.
20th, I believe. So
Right.
yes.
We'll know more what we're going to be seeing. I'm doing a program on September 15th, 9 to 11, and Dr. Wang, who's the medical director at Kaiser, is going to be giving us an update on where we are in San Diego with the Delta variant and the surge and hospitalizations, and a few other really important tips on what's going on. So I think that's going to be great. And then,
Yeah.
of course, I just got a notification from Kaiser this morning, an update that on 9/20, if approved, they believe they will be offering the booster shot
Okay.
for all people that are fully vaccinated. And so that's kind of new news, more to follow on that, right?
Oh, okay.
They're waiting for information on how that process is going to be rolled out, but that is the latest notification that I received from Kaiser, because we're a big partner with Kaiser, because they work
Mhm.
not only on the FBC side, but they also are a big partner with us at Kaiser on the job.
Right, right. So again, to our listeners, tune back in on September 20th for even more greater updates as we then will have a month behind us for a lot of schools that are just opening this week, and almost a couple of months for those who opened up back in July. So Felicia, at this point, I'd like to change directions just a little bit, large because we were presented with some very interesting questions. And so I think it gave us some insight again as to, where there may still be some confusion or just lack of knowledge, about some elements of the interactive process, just like you were mentioning earlier, where, people are not quite clear with that overlay between work-related, non-work-related, the interactive process, et cetera. And so as a point of, I guess, education information, the point that came up recently was, there's always two phases to the interactive process. The first always deals with, how can we help people be at work, stay at work, and perform the work of their usual job assignment. And when that's not effective or readily achievable, then there's a whole other component where we shift to the search for alternative employment. And that's really driven by the Americans with Disabilities Act, but definitely is a component of workers' compensation as well. And so, I guess, if you had three tips to share with people as they consider, the alternative job search, what would those be?
Well, certainly they have been asking, the districts and the charter schools and the colleges have been asking a lot of questions about how long an accommodation has to be offered. And you and I have talked about this a lot, because normally on there it says the job needs to be available for 12 months, right? So the job needs to be for a year, the alternative position. What I tell them is you can get creative, and because of COVID, if we're not sure if things might change, we can write that into the IPM summary and talk about that in the IPM. We normally do not do this and say that this job is till the end of the school year, or this job is until the holiday break, and then we'll reassess in January.
Mm-hmm.
But I think right now, and I defer to you, but right now we have been doing that, because there are some positions, because we have virtual academies at all of our schools, and then we're teaching in person now in all of our schools. And so we have kids, learning in these different environments. And so I think that it's okay now to offer the job with the understanding that it's going to be for 12 months, or the thought that it's going to be for 12 months. But if something changes, to kind of write that in, that we'll reassess it at the break, or at the end of the school year, just because things are fluid.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that, because that brings up a couple points I'd like to add to what you just said then, in that, when we're talking about, well, two things is that if we're talking about some of the COVID-induced changes and the unique offerings and programs that develop short-term as well as longer term, then it's appropriate, like you said, to offer an alternative. But yeah, to also be clear with the caveat, that this is subject to change. And that actually falls back to the other portion of the interactive process as well is that anytime there's a change in the employee's medical condition or a change in business operations, and I always like to add that impact the students' needs. And so, again, right now there's been a need for like distance learning programs and things like that. And so if it was offered, make it available. But now as we're transitioning, the stability of those programs has definitely, well, I should say those programs have certainly sort of evened out from what they were, and we have a better handle on what will be long-term versus shorter term. So a couple things is that, be creative, be flexible, but it's also very important for employers to understand that they are not required to create a position in order to accommodate somebody. They're not required to displace a person in order to accommodate somebody. There are other unique case-by-case factors to take into consideration. And that's just where an IPM is warranted. I couldn't even begin to go into some of the variations of them. But in workers' comp specifically is that there is a caveat that the employee can decline a position that is not 12 months and still be eligible for their job retraining voucher. And so I always like to say, yeah, there are certain conditions, particularly in workers' comp, that, define whether or not an offer is viable. However, that doesn't preclude an employer from making the offer and the employee accepting. Okay.
There was an unusual situation last week because things come up that are odd, that are rare, I guess, occurrences. And the Athens claims team sent over the permanent work restrictions to this school district's, who's rather small, so they don't have tons of jobs available all the time. But because of starting school, they've been hiring and filling positions. And this particular injured worker works in child nutrition services. And they did have 2 openings, and they did just hire 2 new people. And this would have been a job that this person could have done. And that's what she said to me. Am I required to let go? They haven't even, they just are going to start today. This was last week. Am I required to let them go because I just found out that this person is released with these work restrictions and these would be possible alternative positions? And I told her, you can't look backwards, you have to look forwards. And yes, last week before you interviewed and hired those people, this person would have been a good candidate and would have been above these brand new hires, right?
Yes.
But now they've already been hired. So we're not going to unwrite history. Right. She was saying, should we go back and try to undo? But we're past that, right? We've made offers. We've actually made offers in writing and offered benefits, and now they're just going through all of the requirements to pass their clearances. And I told her, we're past that. They've actually been hired contingent on clearing their pre-placement physical things. So now we do have to meet, but if there isn't anything else, then there isn't anything else. So the timing was unfortunate, right? Because they were saying, had they known just even 2 weeks before, the outcome would have been different in the IPM.
Yes, that's an excellent example. And 2 things I'd like to add to that. It supports, my ongoing recommendation that, employers, school districts, have that eye looking forward, aware of who's out on workers' compensation or aware of who's out on medical leave for maybe a non-work related thing, particularly anticipating the start of a new school year, to be looking ahead. And so because, people at the district or at an employer have the ability to have that insight about what's going on. Okay. And so trying to have that bigger mindset about who do we have in the pipeline, of people with medical conditions that we might need to take into consideration. And then, obviously the position's open, which is one of the first criteria. It's an open position. Right. But then does the person meet the qualifications? If they don't meet the stated job qualifications, then it's not an appropriate job alternative. Okay. Then you look at whether or not the person can be accommodated. So that's just one piece I wanted to get out there. And the second piece, there actually has been case law under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I unfortunately cannot cite it right now. But if there has been, if you have an employee with a medical condition who may be considered for an open position, people have interviewed and an offer made, but the job not started. Then there is some wiggle room in there. And so there's some complexity in there, but there's wiggle room before the person starts. Okay.
And I told them that is like an advisory council, HR,
Yeah.
that's beyond my expertise. There
Mhm.
is some legal ramifications where the person, in my ideal world, in that situation, if they had those job openings and they knew this person was out, but they didn't know this person was going to be PNS'd and made permanent stationary, but we might have been able to get that information
Mhm.
before they hired the new people. So that is working with a team with your claims examiner, that you actually are paying attention to who you have that's out that could possibly be a person for those jobs, and then reaching out to the claims team and saying, hey, where are they at? Do they have permanent work restrictions? Can you find out from the doctor? This is very proactive thinking,
Yes.
but in the perfect world, that's what you're doing to avoid the situation that's happened now. Whereas people that have been hired, you know, probably this person would have been perfect. And there were two positions, right? Two
Mhm.
positions that this person could have been available for. Another question that I got last week that I get quite a bit is, what about substitutes? So
Mhm.
substitutes aren't contracted and aren't typically covered under the bargaining agreements like classified and certificated staff are. However, they still are covered when they're injured. They're employees of ours while they're working, and they're on sublists, long-term sublists. And subs are hard to come by now. I mean, now
Yes.
subs are dear. I mean, a lot of districts are really struggling to find subs. So what I always tell them, if this substitute on a sublist is permanent and stationary and has permanent work restrictions, if you don't meet with them to determine if you can accommodate, because your district doesn't feel that they're actual employees, so you normally wouldn't hold an IPM with them, you can't bring them back on the sublist. They have to stay on off the sublist because you haven't made any kind of determination on their status. So when in doubt, I think you still have to meet whether or not they're covered as classified or certificated, because where are they? Then they're
Mhm.
left in some kind of limbo land. They're
Yes.
on the sublist, but they can't work because we don't know whether we can accommodate their work restrictions because we've never met with them. So that's why I always say, when in doubt, interact.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think you and I always, because you won't be harmed for doing it when you
Yeah.
shouldn't, but you could really be harmed for not doing it. And if subs are valuable to you and you have a substitute that can't work because they're on a red light status on the sub list, then that's not utilizing that person to their fullest, right?
Yes. Absolutely. And uh, y- yeah, I love what you had to say. If in doubt, interact, because um, it's a low cost investment to avoid a high cost compliance issue outcome. And I want to add to your prior comment about this whole alternative job offer and hiring new people. The way the ADA takes a look at it, and it's important, I think, for people to understand that there are. I mean, if we think it's complicated in California, it's FEHA, ADA, and workers' comp. This has a much bigger umbrella in that, under the Department of Labor, the goal is to keep people working, because when people with medical conditions are not worked, there's huge tolls on various disability programs, but also the stats show that the quality of life and level of income per family when there is a member who is disabled and unable to work is huge to society. And so going back to your question about, if I have an employee with a medical condition, consider them first, because the ADA will say better to keep somebody working than to cost them the loss of their job to bring somebody else in new who isn't yet working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who's not
Right.
your employee. And so it's about employee-employer relationships, but also, the impact of costing someone their job when somebody else doesn't even have that job yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And that is a very sticky subject. So that's why I told them you have to go to your advisory council to ask them, is it better? Is it better to withdraw the job offers that we've already given to the two so that we have a job because we think we can accommodate in this job for these injured employees? Or is it better to tell the injured employee, we have nothing, we have no alternative, no other alternative positions for you. I'm so sorry, you need to run through the rest of your leave and go on 39 month. What is better, right? Because that I told them is a legal question. That's
Yeah.
not a me question.
And on that, I would just recommend to all of our listeners then that, one, if you find yourself in that situation, delay the offer while you do an interactive meeting with the employee, the existing employee, and just put the offer on delay until you can evaluate whether or not this employee would even qualify. Again, if you don't have enough information, if the person doesn't qualify, they don't automatically get the job.
Right.
Okay, they have to meet the qualifications. That's something clearly stated in the ADA. Now, on another point, Felicia, workers' comp does have an income threshold for alternative work that the ADA does not. And they all, the 4 criteria listed on the DWC notice. And so, again, the way, how I recommend it read or be interpreted is that if a job alternative is offered and the pay level falls short of the 85% threshold, the employee has the right to decline it and still remain eligible for workers' compensation benefits, but that also means no ongoing employment for the employee. Okay. So again, it's just like before, it's not that you can't offer a job, it's up to the employee to then decide. And so it's not that you can't offer, but the employee gets to decide whether or not they want to accept it. And I actually had an employee who was working full-time, could not handle full-time work again, was willing to accept a 3-hour position that did pay less because he wanted to keep working.
Which is unbenefited, right?
Yeah.
We see that a lot. I always tell the districts, you always want to try to offer what you have. It may not meet all the criteria. That doesn't mean, that just means whether we have to offer a voucher if they don't accept it. That doesn't mean that the employee can't accept a lesser job. And I would say that we have quite a few employees that have accepted part-time employment versus leaving altogether. And that depends on where they're at with their benefits, right? Because once you go from full-time to part-time, you lose your benefits. But some of them have benefits through a spouse, or they have some alternative benefit arrangements that they can work on. And so that has, a big impact. And I will say that more often than not, when employees are offered an alternative position that doesn't meet the 85%, they accept the job. I have seen people say, no, that's not acceptable. I would rather take no job than that job and walk away. But not very many people do that, actually. If they really like their work, a lot of them are very passionate about their work, and they would rather keep their relationship with the district. And also they're working towards their pension, and they have some goals that they want to reach. So, there's nothing wrong with offering the job, right? And just seeing what they say.
Well, as I like to say, and I just actually experienced this over the weekend, somebody was trying to make a decision for me. I was like, well, thank you for your thoughts, but let me make that decision for me, now that I have the information. And so I would say the same thing is true for our districts out there, is that, again, don't make decisions on behalf of the employer. Engage in the interactive process, have a conversation, and then conclude mutually whether or not it's acceptable, whether or not they, want to accept a lower paying job. That's where the interaction comes in. That's what the laws are looking for, is that an interaction and an open discussion about those things. Which I just want to clarify to them on that note, the ADA language is actually, employers are not required to offer promotion. The person has to actively compete against that. But for any lateral or lesser position, provided they meet the stated qualifications, then they should be offered that position. Then you determine whether or not they can be accommodated with their medical condition if the job might be impacted. So the assessment of accommodation is not just the offer of an alternative job, but also, performing the method or manner of the job as normally required and impacting the delivery of services, so there's no undue hardship. So you still go through that process, but they first have to meet the stated qualifications to be considered. And that includes testing or interviewing to verify that they have the qualifications. So
we have been seeing a lot, I'm sure you have too. I've been seeing a lot of instances where injured workers or people with a disability and illness, especially with COVID, where they've needed some, because of an underlying health condition, they've needed to continue to work virtually, even though maybe their position has returned to in-person. I know you've seen a lot of this too.
Mhm.
And we have been able to move them, but a lot of them have had to move back either to a lesser position or maybe a position of a little less pay.
Mhm.
Also, some of the positions that they want that are virtual are different than, they might be lateral, but they're different, a different grade. There's
Mhm.
more changes and modification in work right now going on, because almost all the districts have a virtual option for parents that don't want to put their kids back
Mhm.
in school for whatever reason, right? There's multiple reasons why that is. And so almost all of them have those options available. And our charter school members always were working in a hybrid space, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they were never none of them were really in traditional school 5 days a week. So this was in some ways an easier transition for them with COVID. But I have noticed there's been lots of really creative assignments being offered. Some of them are lateral and some of them of lesser positions if you don't want to come back to in person, because there are a lot of districts where they need, every able-bodied teacher,
Mhm.
back in
Mhm.
the classroom, and
Mhm.
aides too in this special ed department. So it's been interesting though. I have seen a lot of creativity and flexibility.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Felicia, again, I so appreciate your wealth of knowledge and information and insight to all that's going on for our school districts. And as we wrap up, I just want to remind our listeners and viewers that I will have what we call show notes, as far as some highlights of what we talked about today, so you get a feel for that. Um, and what came up in my mind, as you were saying earlier, when in doubt, interact. And I came up with proact and interact.
Oh, I
Proact
like that.
Proactively engage and interact to get the information out there before you make any decisions.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I like that. And I just think I'll just echo the words of our leader, Dr. Paul Gotthold. I think that there's so much to get distracted over, and it's been very difficult to keep up on all the information with the CDC and the science on vaccination and testing and contact tracing and the health department and OSHA and all the
oh
regulations.
yeah.
And then in workers' comp, we put, 3 new laws in effect too, just to make an already complicated system even more complicated with COVID. It's been a little challenging for the districts to keep up, but they have been laser focused on taking care of the kids' needs, both from a nutrition standpoint and education, and giving them all the love and support that they need. So I'm so happy and energized to do my job to help them, support them in every way that I can.
Well, great, because you do a wonderful job of it. I'm so honored to be able to work with you and partner with you in all that we do.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's been challenging.
Yes.
Let me-
Well, in the year ahead, 21, 22 is going to be another year of
Right.
full of change and intrigue. And I'd like to say, though, innovation. I mean, look how
Mhm.
remarkably
Oh,
the world has pivoted. And I do a lot in the legal world, too. And, from doing virtual hearings and virtual mediations to, of course, doing our virtual IPMs, but just the technology that has,
mhm,
been thrust and taken advantage of within the school
mhm.
districts is just incredible.
In workers' comp, we do things we never did. We do all of our depots now the way we're doing this meeting. We do all of them on Zoom. Pretty much we do very little in person because a lot of the attorneys and doctors and injured workers don't want to do it that way.
Mhm.
And we do all of our trials, we do on a kind of a virtual video platform, and we do all of our hearings on a court call. Where the attorneys call in and wait and then conference call the cases with the judge. So we do everything virtually, and our claims team has been home the entire time since March. Everyone's working at home all the time, and they have been doing a fantastic job, my opinion. But
Well, great, great.
fantastic.
Well, thank you again. Thank you again, San Diego County Office of Education, the JPA, for all that you do to support our school districts and therefore the learning of our students. And this is Dr. Debra Dupree. I'm delighted to host this once a month, and tune in for September 20th. I'm sure we'll have lots of updates in all kinds of ways. See you soon.